He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with over 26 years of experience. Together, we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. We're back for another episode, Henry. Today, we are embarking on something we've never tried before, and I think we both agree it's going to be fun. We're going to write a creative brief right in front of your eyes, right here on the episode. We invited folks on LinkedIn to make some suggestions of some brands and to write out a problem or an opportunity. And we had some of our friends at the University of Minnesota's Hubbard School of Mass Communication and Journalism give us some great topics. We examined Hulu, Bumble, and what was the other one? There was a third one. I can't remember what it is now, but we chose Hulu. So we wrote this out. Let's do a quick screen share and review the problem that we chose to make sure we're still on board. So here's the problem written out by someone whose name I can't remember. I'll put it in the notes. But it's identified as a problem as opposed to an opportunity for Hulu. With a new streaming service launching every week, viewers today have more options than ever. The average US consumer now uses 7 streaming services, and new entrants like Disney Plus and Paramount are offering aggressive sign-in packages to consumers, leaving Hulu lost in a sea of options. Write a brief that helps Hulu differentiate in a crowded market. So do we still agree that this is the problem, Henry?
I agree largely with this. There's a few things that, I question the statistic of the 7 streaming services. I was looking at a report from Nielsen. The number seems to be more on the average of 3 to 4 is what most households subscribe to. And we could look at that. I'm going to share some stuff on the screen. I think the value of doing this brief is how to think about writing a brief as you're writing a brief. And I'm going to take you through the process that I would go through as if this was a pitch for Hulu. Now, this is for a podcast. This isn't for work. So I put some time into it. I haven't put the amount of time that I would put into something for work, but I put enough time into it so far that we could start having a conversation about what are the issues that Hulu has, and how do we think we're going to solve them with communication? Because that's really, to me, the question for a creative brief in advertising is the communication problem, right? So Hulu is a brand, it's also a business, and there's a ton of business decisions that are made all the time. That's not what we're talking about here. This isn't a marketing brief. This is an advertising creative brief. So I agree generally what they're saying is, it seems like every week there's a new streaming service, right? So it's a highly competitive environment. And in terms of aggressive sign-in packages, I think everybody's got kind of like a free trial type of thing. Everybody allows you to kind of quit your account whenever you want. But definitely, I think differentiating or within a crowded market is an objective for this advertising campaign that we would be briefing for. So I agree with that.
Okay, well, another thing to keep in mind here is that, we're essentially going to take, I don't know how much time we're going to take to do this. We're going to edit it down to our typical episode, probably about an hour, maybe less. And in the real world, we wouldn't write a creative brief in an hour. It would take a lot more time, a lot more thinking. And that's what I say to my workshop participants. And I give them far less time than you and I are going to take in this exercise. They might have 15 or 20 minutes. There is a value to a timed exercise. It focuses your thinking. It tends to eliminate overthinking. But again, this is I agree with you. This is not how we would go about writing a brief. And let's remind our viewers that I don't write briefs. I've learned a ton about brief writing from you, Henry, and from other account planners and strategists like you. So what I hope to bring to the party here is the insights that I've picked up over the years. I can kind of be a bit of a BS detector, a devil's advocate, challenging some of your thinking, offering up some other things, and helping you fine tune your thinking, which is what I think you try to do when you work with your creative department and share your drafts of a brief to get a reality check. It's something that every good brief writer does and absolutely should do. So I think from that perspective, uh, let's just have some fun. You know,
Okay.
I can't
So
I can't
so
wait to.
so before I'm going to share my screen in a second and go through maybe some of the documents, some of the websites and things that I've looked at in preparation. But I think before we do that, maybe go to the first question of the brief here on the
Sure.
mural.
Let's try
Um,
not to give everybody vertigo. I've
yeah.
created let's just back up and show. I've created a special mural for this exercise. And these are just the front pages of some of the documents that Henry has done some research. We can't look at them on the mural, but this is what he's going to be showing us in detail. So our first question from our brief is context. What is the background for this assignment? You want to look at any other question? You want to start there,
No,
Henry?
I want to start there because I'm a linear thinker. I think that it's taboo to say that these days, but I gotta get from A to B to C. Like if I can't just jump, so I need to go from big to small, and so when I go big to small, I need to know what's the context. And here for Hulu, right, we're talking about entertainment, home entertainment, television, and so I have a little bit of experience in this category because I worked on the Dish Network business for their Latino product. And so the macro context I can just talk about without clicking on any documents or anything is that, there was a time where you got TV in your house, it came in over the air, and it was free. And it was free because advertisers sponsored all of the content. And you got 3 or 4 channels on the VHF, which was like the high quality, channels. And then there was like low power UHF stations where you kind of got like rerun movies and things like that. And so there wasn't a lot of choice. And then probably in the late 70s, early 80s, we had the advent of cable. And what cable was literally a cable that went into your house, just like a phone cable. And it went to a box that sat on your television. And suddenly you could have 30 channels of content. And there was new channels, things like CNN popped up, things like MTV popped up. And suddenly there was a lot of different choices. And because it wasn't coming in over the airwaves, there was also the opportunity for more adult content, R-rated titles, X-rated titles, things like that. And cable grew dramatically, and pretty soon every middle class household and above, and maybe even lower middle class and above, had some form of cable or satellite TV service in their house. And in the 90s, the internet became a thing. And initially, the internet was pictures and words. And the internet that you got over your phone, and it wasn't capable of transmitting video or high resolution things. It was very slow. But then the advent of broadband cable, in which high amounts of data could be transmitted, came into play. And suddenly you could stream video. And that meant you could work around or go over the top of cable or satellite. And you could, if you created content, you could market that content to people without them necessarily, and they could watch it on their TV or they could watch it on their laptop or whatever device. And that's kind of how we get our first streaming services, among which Hulu was one of the first,
Yeah.
commercially viable streaming services. So that's all kind of like history, ancient history, and not necessarily something that would go in a brief. But I think that the net result of it is, cable and satellite is dying. People are choosing to go for a streaming solution, which means usually subscribing to multiple streaming services. The big chief complaint with cable was, yeah, I pay $80 a month and I get 100 channels, but I only watch 6 of them.
If that many.
And so I'm paying for a lot of stuff, and I can't buy the channels I want a la carte. And now with streaming, I can buy the content that I want a la carte. So I'm going to dump cable. I'm going to dump the $80 a month. I'm going to get Netflix and pay $12 or $13 a month. I might get Hulu or something else to round it out. And that's how I'm going to get my entertainment needs fulfilled, my home TV entertainment needs fulfilled. So that's basically the backstory and the history of the assignment. I can pull up, and I'm going to share a.
Let me stop sharing here so you can
Yep.
share at your end.
Yep.
All right.
And
just I'm going to let the folks know here that from time to time I'll look like I'm looking and paying attention, but I might be making some notes on our mural that we'll share with you later.
One of the things that I did was I Googled streaming Nielsen. Why? Because I know that Nielsen, the TV rating company, does a lot of research. They put out a lot of reports about different things. And I know from my past that they keep up to date on trends. So this was a document that I found called Nielsen State of Play. The video streaming industry has reached a tipping point is the subtitle. And, I scroll down a little bit there, Howard. You can see here, they give some examples of the different types of streaming services or different types of content and the types of services they appear on. Scroll down to the next page. Talking about the devices that people stream. This, I believe the graph here on the right is audio. Keep going down.
I'm just amazed at how many people will stream something on their phone.
Well, that's for audio. So
oh, is it? Oh,
yeah, that okay. Specific graph was for audio. Here they talk about live TV versus time shifted TV versus TV connected device. Scroll down. Tracking the explosion of an impact of streaming choice. So here's why I disagreed a little bit with the idea of the 7 average. According to Nielsen, and I would take their data as being pretty accurate, you can see that in 2019, more than almost 70% of people had 2 streaming services or less. Even today, it's 4 or less. So that the average is probably somewhere in between 3 or 4 streaming services that people are, and you could see the spend here in terms of what they're spending monthly, and it can go, from $5 up or from 0 to all the way up to, more than $50. So I would agree with the premise that, there's a ton of choice. And I think that the main premise of this paper and also a related article from Nielsen is that there's a ton of choices out there. So as a strategist, one of the things that I'm aware of, and as an observer of human nature, is something called the paradox of choice. And the paradox of choice talks about if you have too little choice, you're unhappy. And if you have too many choices, you get confused and unhappy. So there's a sweet spot in terms of number of choices available to you, above which everything becomes noise. And so I think that for Hulu, really the goal is to be in the consideration set of that top 2 or 3 streaming services that we want people that subscribe to streaming services to be subscribed to. I don't think the objective here is to necessarily be number 1, but to be in that mix, because we see that increasingly people are subscribed to 2 or 3 of these services. So we want to be in that wheelhouse in the general consideration set.
And the challenge for Hulu is going to be pretty steep, because it's not like people choose 5 or 6 or 7 as the problem is stated. There's a limited pile.
Yep. So if you scroll down, I think one more page, there was another thing that I wanted to, um, I laughed when I saw this headline, which is bundling is the streaming future that consumers want. So they got away from cable because it was too bundled and there wasn't, and now they're basically saying, you know, what would be great is like if you could give me a package so that I wouldn't, and again, I think this has to do with that paradox of choice. When they didn't have many choices, they were unhappy. So they said, we want choice, but now they've got so many, they're saying, well, you got to find a way to simplify this for me and bundle it for me. So that's kind of what I wanted to show on this particular document.
Okay.
I also, and we don't necessarily have to put them on the screen, looked at some news articles, recent news articles about Hulu, their current subscriber base, how many subscribers they have. A lot of articles related to their being part of Disney, which is something that I learned that I didn't know.
Yeah, me too.
A little bit of my personal kind of intuition on Hulu is I've never been a subscriber to Hulu. I know it's been around forever. I know that they've had an ad supported tier for a long time. I seem to remember at one time they had a lot of content from NBC on there, and that might be right or wrong, but it was never one of the services that I personally subscribed to.
Yeah, for just as a personal interjection here, just because we're going to be working on this, I have subscribed to Hulu once. I think it was a 1 or 2 week free trial. And then I think I let it go on for the second month because I am a big fan of NBC's show, This Is Us. And I couldn't get all the early seasons. There's 5, I think they're in their 6th and final season now. You couldn't get the early seasons on the other apps, NBC or Peacock. You could only get the most recent. So I did experience it. It wasn't bad. There wasn't anything else that I was particularly attracted to, so I canceled. But I have had some time on Hulu.
So that's another. You kind of bring up an interesting aspect to subscription businesses, which is churn. Churn
Yes.
is the number of subscribers that you lose, and so in a direct response campaign like we used to run for Dish Latino, there was a cost per acquisition, right? So we would advertise and we run our direct response TV, and we would generate phone calls. It would generate a certain number of appointments, would generate a certain number of installations and accounts, and there was a cost to doing that, and you needed to have a subscriber be a subscriber for a certain length of time before that cost per acquisition paid off and the customer became profitable. So I think it's interesting, part of the business is we know we're going to lose some customers, right? They like they subscribe for a specific reason. When that specific reason ended, so did their subscription, and they're gone.
Yep.
So you have to constantly be looking for new people to replace those just to stay even with your subscriber base. Forget about growing. So if you want to grow, your activations have to be higher than the losses that you
do you have an opinion, Henry, as to what you think is an acceptable churn rate or an unacceptably high churn rate?
I would have no clue, not having worked specifically in this type of streaming, and not having worked in subscription TV in a few years. I will say, I believe the cost per acquisition for a streaming service is significantly lower than for like a cable company and the reason is you don't have to roll a truck out to somebody's house. You don't have to install equipment. You don't have to, that's all on the consumer. They have a smart TV, they have a Roku device, they have a streaming stick, whatever they have, their internet. So basically you're just having them sign up online. There'll be
Type in a
cost,
credit card number.
There'll be a cost associated with the advertising that you're spending monthly to keep your name before the public, as Paul Feldwick would say. There'll also be a cost associated with giving the consumer the first month or the first week or whatever the programming that you're giving them. So there are some costs, but they will be significantly lower than a cable company or a satellite TV company.
Would you say that a 25% churn rate was good or bad?
You know, I would not be surprised. I think it seems very high. I think
Yes.
that probably a churn rate, and again, I'm speculating, a churn rate for something like Hulu might be 5% a month, something like that.
I throw that figure out because near the end of my advertising career, I worked for a company that was selling products on a subscription basis, and they had a churn rate of 25% and found it acceptable, which stunned me. I won't name the company.
It speaks to not being a good product because you're losing a quarter of your base every month, and that's just yeah. I mean, it's not a good product.
No, they found it acceptable, and they were making money hand over fist, but it was a very high churn rate.
You know, there's reasons why people will close their account, right? I mean, like they're legitimate. It's not because you found the service to be bad. It's just the thing that you were interested, they don't offer it anymore, and you don't have a need for it anymore. Somebody dies, that account's going to go away. You know, somebody moves and they're changing there's with satellite and cable, that's a big deal. That's a big moment, right? I move, so now the same cable company might not be in the new place. It's a different cable company. There's no cable available, so I have to get satellite. So there's all of that is part of so I think the net of all of this to a brief writer is you got to explore all these crevices, right? You got to understand the business. You got to understand what are the metrics of the business. So I started out literally with Wikipedia, looking at the history of Hulu on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a suspect source because anybody could write anything on there, but a lot of the stuff is referenced and sourced to news articles and things. And when you're talking about something like Hulu, you're not going to find that it's controversial and the people are changing the narrative about it. So I relied on that. I went to hulu.com and looked at their website and how they recruit. One of the interesting things that I found is, so when you subscribe to Hulu, and we don't have to show.
Do you want to look at another document here?
Maybe if you could pull up your browser and go to hulu.com and share that. We're looking at the hulu.com website, and you'll notice, first of all, what's the first thing your eye is drawn to on the hulu.com website?
Get the Disney bundle.
And the Disney logo, Disney Plus.
Well, these three things here. That white button is designed to be, to pull your focus.
Yeah,
like,
but I mean,
here.
Disney is front and center on the Hulu website. Now we could debate whether
I'm a direct response guy, Henry. That's my eye goes to the call to action button. Get the Disney bundle.
That's fine, but if I'm the brand manager for Hulu, I don't know that I'm happy with, like, that my brand's website has my sister brand's logo front and center, because at the end of the day, these are three streaming services all owned by Disney that you can bundle. But this is hulu.com. So if you scroll down a little bit, keep going, they show some of the content. They talk about live TV, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So if you go down, keep going down, and you see select your plan, you'll see here. So if we're just looking at Hulu, and you're looking at subscribing, there's a tier that costs $6.99. There's a tier that costs $12.99. And so for that, you get essentially the same content, but no ads. And then you have the Hulu Plus Live TV, and that is $70 a month. And
Bumping
so
up against the cost of cable, isn't it?
absolutely. And it is essentially a substitute for cable. You get a lot
Yeah.
of the same channels, the live TV channels. Whether the programming is technically live, it's not really. What they mean is this is what's going out over the air on cable and satellite. You can get it through this bundle. So
But we're saying, Henry, that we're going to be focusing for this brief on the first tube and not the bundle.
correct. And I think we're taking a little creative license here, because this is complex and it could become, normally we would get a brief, they would tell us where the problem was, whether it was with this Hulu Plus live TV product or whether it was with their standard product. So
Yeah.
my take on it is to build the Hulu brand, to create a reason for Hulu to exist. This is what we do. This is what you can expect from us. And in that, I think that it's the first two columns. But given what we know about people and that they want to pay as little as possible and get as much as possible for as little as possible, I would say we're focusing on the first two columns, but our star is probably going to be the cheapest way to get into Hulu. Like it's the hook to get people in. And then later, if they want to, I don't want to fuss with ads, and for me, it's fine. They can upgrade to the $12.99. But as a way in the door, I think the $6.99 Hulu, create the brand, create some value around the brand, and hopefully people will feel that $7 a month is a value for what they're getting on this list of things that you get.
And my take on this as a creative is that my eyes are starting to glaze over here. It's like this is just information overload, and my DNA, my genetic makeup as a creative is saying, what's the one thing I really want to be focusing on? What's the one thing I can say? And when I scroll back up here, I don't want to give anybody a headache here. This to me is a typical client saying, we don't have one thing to say, we have three things to say: Hulu, Disney, and ESPN. And they can't make up their mind. But I mean, I get the business challenge here. They perceive the bundling package as a way that's popular. As a creative, I'm saying,
I'm not a direct response expert, and I'm not a UX expert, but my instinct tells me that on the Hulu.com page, you should be sold on Hulu. And then
yes,
when you scroll down and you're thinking about subscribing, at that stage, you would get the options like, hey, have you considered getting the bundle with Disney Plus? Have you considered getting the Live Plus, the TV? So to me, they're already trying to upsell you before they've even
yep.
told you what the brand is about, what we're good for, what you're going to find. And so that to me seems a little bit backward. And so that's the approach that I would take in writing my brief and creating a campaign for Hulu.
Yeah. And I think if we were to view this as a real live situation, and it's not, we would be cognizant of the fact that the client is going to want to sell all three of their babies. Even though they do a little nod here and say, this is the most popular one. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. Who knows? We have to get some inside information to answer that question. But if you look at this to me is like, oh my goodness. The only thing I like about this is, from a direct response perspective, is that's a pretty, it's the cleanest looking thing on the page. It's where my eye goes. But this is a mess.
Yeah.
So we have a challenge in writing this brief. We have a challenge because if Hulu is suffering or struggling, the way the problem has been stated, we have a couple of obstacles to overcome. One of which is a client that wants to market all three of its main products.
Yep. And you can see here, I think, a little bit of our often conversation about, I don't want to litigate this in a brief stage with the client. I want to have our creatives come up with a solution, and then I want to get a chance to sell this to the clients. And say, listen, we looked at your website. The first thing you see is the Disney Plus logo. It's gigantic. and this is the Hulu brand page. We need to create differentiation for this brand. That's what you told us in your brief. I mean, assuming that our problem was defined by the client, we need to differentiate this brand. And the first thing you're doing is blurring it with Disney and ESPN. Let's sell people on Hulu, and then let's upsell them to Disney and ESPN when the moment is correct, which is at some further point in the purchase process.
Did you use the word differentiate? I like your, I prefer to hear you say distinguish, make it distinctive,
Well,
because can we
that's
really differentiate?
that's something that we need to have a conversation about a little bit further on. I think we're still
Yeah.
at the context stage. But yeah, I definitely think so. I think
Were you
we could.
were you trying to sneak in a little advocacy for the don't show the client your creative brief
Yes,
perspective?
yes,
I caught
yes.
that. I caught that. I'm actually starting
I
to
would.
agree with you, but I hope you can edit that part out. You know, I don't want the world to hear me say that.
You can bet it'll be in. It'll stay in.
Oh,
All right. So,
shit.
so Howard. So
Yes.
the next thing that I did was I looked at syndicated research to see, well, how popular is Hulu relative to other streaming services.
Okay. I'm going to
So
stop sharing here.
there's a Excel spreadsheet that I'm going to provide to you briefly, and we can share. So the next thing I did was I looked at syndicated research. In this particular case, it's MRI Simmons, which is a syndicated research service my agency subscribes to. And at the top, on the top left, you can see like some of the, vital statistics of the study. So you could see that this was the study name is 2022 Winter MRI Simmons USA. You could see the start field date, the end field date, and the date executed, which was today, the date that I ran the cross tabulation. And I did a basic cross tabulation here, which is I went to the section of questions that have to do with streaming services that the household subscribes to. Now, there are more streaming services than these, but these are the ones that they currently have in the questionnaire. And it contains the most important ones. So the way you read this in particular is because I didn't select a specific target. I just wanted to know households in the US. All of this pertains to households in the US. So if you look at where it says total 49,216, that's the number of people that were actually answered this questionnaire. And then you can see the sample that responded affirmatively to each of these subscription services. And then there's a weighted number, which is what does that represent in the real world, right? Like, so what does 5,700 out of 49,000 represent? Well, it represents about a little more than 10%, or the 10.6%. So if we look at that, we can see we're looking at now the column that says vertical percentage.
Yep.
And we can see that Netflix at 63% is
Let me make this a little bit bigger.
Is the leading streaming service. Okay, Netflix, 63%. And then you go to 41.4% is the next highest number, and that's Prime Video.
Prime Video, right.
So it's important to stop here and note that Prime Video, I mean, that's a big number, 41.4%. But Prime Video is really an added benefit to Amazon Prime members, right? It comes as part of the package when you get Amazon Prime. And I think a lot of people are like you and me that have Amazon Prime because we get a lot of packages shipped to our house, and it makes sense for us to just not have to worry about shipping on every package we order. But we get this service, so we're subscribed. I'm sure there are people that have Amazon Prime that have never opened their Prime Video application. Yeah. So that number's probably a little inflated given the fact that the main thing that Amazon Prime offers isn't video streaming, although it is an important benefit and they do have good content. Things like Bosch and so forth.
Well, the other thing that Prime has that the others don't have, I think, I could be wrong on this, but on Prime, you can rent a video, you can rent a streamed video if you don't have it on the free streaming. You can't do that on Netflix. You can't do that on Disney. You can't do that on ESPN. There might be some occasional exceptions, like you could buy I think when Hamilton first came out, you might have been able to buy it on Disney, but if you were a subscriber, it would be free. But no other streaming service that I know of allows you to actually rent a streamed video except for Prime.
Yeah, because they have a, you know, Amazon is a company with a lot of different lines of business, right? So one of their lines of business has always been the selling of books and videos and content. So
now the other thing is that Netflix, obviously you can still subscribe to the home delivery of DVDs, although, you know, I'd love to know what percentage of people still get a DVD.
I'm sure it's in the low single digits.
Yes.
Of their subscriber base. So Amazon Prime, with the caveat that, you know, those numbers are probably a little bit inflated in terms of like what, you know, people believe they're paying for versus what they're really using and so forth, and that there's a bundle of benefits associated with Amazon Prime that goes well beyond streaming. The next one is Hulu. So what we're seeing here basically is, and by the way, this is adults respondents, and we're asking them questions about their household. So 35% of adults are reporting that they have Hulu in their household. So it's not, these are not households, this is 35% of adults. So it's important to distinguish that there. But you can see that Hulu is the third most popular streaming service, followed closely by Disney Plus at 32.7. And then the other interesting thing to note is that Disney+ is a sister brand of Hulu, right? So that the fourth competitor, potentially the third, is the sister brand of Hulu. Then you start getting into some of the smaller numbers like Apple TV Plus, Peacock TV, and ESPN
Sling.
Plus.
So actually, we can say that
Sling is actually more akin to what we were talking about with Hulu plus live TV. It's a bundler of live TV. They don't have their own content. They're actually bundling, you know, CNN, ESPN, things like that, and you can buy a package with them.
So you could say, though, that if you're looking at a single brand in terms of its market share, Disney, ESPN, and Hulu own 70. Well, there's 70 some odd percent.
There's probably duplication there, right?
Yeah, there might be.
So I could manipulate this data and query it in a way where I could eliminate the duplication and come at a net number of like how many households are we reaching with the three. That goes beyond the scope of what we're talking about.
Right.
So let's go to the other spreadsheet. So what I did here was, here you'll notice that there's like different blocks of data moving from left to right, and you see the one that's labeled total, you see the one that's labeled household subscribes to Hulu, and then household subscribes to Netflix. And what we're looking at here is just some very basic demographics. So total means the US population. And so that's 253 million adults. And what we can see is that adults that live in households that subscribe to Hulu is about 89 million adults, and adults that live in households that subscribe to Netflix is about 160 million adults. And then we can see the gender breakdown. We can see non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black, and Hispanic. And it's interesting because you'll see, like, for example, for Hulu, 63.7% of Hulu subscribers, or people that live in households that subscribe to Hulu, are non-Hispanic white. And that is a little lower than the total population, which is 65.4. So there's a slight under index among whites for subscribing. And then you see the same, you see the opposite for black and Hispanic, where the percentages are a little higher. So
Yeah.
the subscriber base of Hulu is a little bit more Hispanic and a little bit more black than the general population. And I believe the reason for that is on the next line, which is the median age. And you see there under the weighted column, on total, if you go to the total, it's where it says 47.6, that's the median age of adults in the United States, people above the age of 18. They're 47.6 years old. But if you go to the Hulu, you see that it's 38.6. And if you go to Netflix, it's 42.9. So two things here. One is that if you subscribe to these streaming services, you're younger than the general population. And in the case of Hulu, significantly, it's almost 10 years younger. And we know the Hispanic market is significantly young. So what we're seeing is streaming is for younger people. Older people tend to be more affluent. They're more averse to change. They're probably less likely to get rid of their cable subscription. So they're not, they're not messing with the Roku or the streaming stick or whatever. And
some of us are rebels in our old age.
So you start to see patterns develop, and you start to recognize, and I could have picked a ton of demographics. I could have gone into psychographics, which I'm not going to do in this exercise. We can look at married. So it's roughly equivalent to what we see in the total population. About 63% are married or living with partner. I've been adding or living with partner because we've seen as a culture, right, that there's a lot more people, a significant percentage of people that don't get married. They're just living with their partner. Same sex,
this is interesting.
Same sex
here.
or opposite sex. Yeah.
Labeled. Yeah, that's really, I think that's a fascinating observation. And I can already start to see literally the words that we're going to put together as we describe who we're talking to for this brief. And even though you don't do psychographics, I think we can draw some, based on our experience, we can draw some powerful conclusions about who we're going to be talking to. Yep. But this is really, from a creative, this is the kind of deep dive that I don't see. I see the results. I don't see the actual process that you go through. So as a creative, this is a fascinating exercise.
So the other interesting thing to me is the if you look at the owner rent, you'll see that our Netflix and Hulu subscribers, particularly Hulu subscribers, are over index on renting at 117. So 32% of Hulu subscribers are renters, even though the majority are own their home. It's a higher proportion are renters than in the general population, which is 27.2%. So these are the types of things that I typically look at when I'm writing a creative brief. Children living at home, you could see a big over index of 120. Almost 42% of Hulu subscribers have children in the home, 40.3% for Netflix. And I only chose Netflix as kind of our straw man competitor because they had #1 market share. You could see that more likely to have children living in the home, more likely to be renters. I also have some education statistics here in terms of highest level of education achieved, et cetera. So that's some of the stuff that would go into a target description, as
definitely
you rightly pointed out.
Yeah, we'd have fun with this. I think we could draw a really, what I like to call a word picture, and what you have called, that I really admire, is this description that a creative can don as a costume to live and see through the eyes of our customer.
So
Yeah, we've got
here-
stuff.
so here's what I propose that we do, Howard. Why don't we go to your whiteboard, your mural,
Okay.
and maybe we could start putting in some post-it notes around a couple of the questions that on the brief, particularly the first two. Let's do some post-it notes.
Okay.
Let's do one that says societal switch from cable/satellite to streaming services.
Okay.
Let's add another one that says crowded marketplace with many competitors. Let's do another one. Competitors offer varied content, comma, frequently exclusive. Let's do a post-it note around, let's go to find the question that says, what's the most interesting thing we know about the target?
What's the most interesting thing about these buyers, our
Yeah,
brands, or the industry?
let's put a candidate up there for that. This is the insight, basically.
Okay.
Let's put paradox of choice that we talked about.
Yep, I like that.
And let's go to buyers. Who are the people we need to do this with? This is our target audience. We can put median age 38. We could put own home.
Notice what I'm doing here? I'm putting it in first person.
Yep. We could let's do a separate post-it where we're going to caveat some of this stuff. Say
Okay.
more likely to rent than general population. No, more likely to rent.
Okay, let's just do that. We can
Yeah,
finesse
this
the
is
language.
us talking about them, because even though, again, this gets back to the majority, 65% own their own home. The renters actually, you're more likely to rent if you're a Hulu subscriber than if you're just part of the general population. So
Okay.
that's a distinction I want to make. What else? I'm more likely to be Hispanic or African American than the general population. Let's put another post-it note. I subscribe to multiple streaming services. Maybe we do another one that talks about I got rid of cable because it was too expensive. And there were too many channels I didn't watch.
With too few choices. Oh yeah.
No, yeah, it's more the opposite. It's like I only watch half a dozen channels, but I'm paying for 100.
Yeah. So maybe this is a good spot to say, stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
We will be back with another episode of the Brief Brothers as we write our creative brief. Henry and I don't know how many episodes this is going to take, but we're kind of talking as we turned the recording on and off as we're doing stuff and realized we're thinking out loud, and that's how this process works. And we don't want to rush this. We're going to edit this down to a more digestible format. It may take 2, 3, maybe 4 episodes to get through this, but hey, that's how
I think it's a realistic view at the effort that it takes to think about. And then and you notice that we put those post-its around. We didn't answer the questions yet, because
right.
That part, and as Howard, I know you agree with me, brief writing is writing, and writing requires you to be deliberate, to think about the words that you're going to put on there, to wordsmith them. So right now we're just putting the things that we think are going to be contained within that box, but we're not wordsmithing or copywriting it yet.
Yeah, that's the point. That box we've created with the questions is essentially blank, and we're going to take our finished first draft, because that's what we're doing is a first draft. We're going to take our finished first draft and put those answers within that box, and the ones we have just kind of outlining it or floating around it we're just our brainstorming, our thinking.
Yep.
So
stuff that may or may not go into those boxes, and may be articulated differently when we answer the question.
Exactly. So Henry, good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time.